the Security Operations Center never truly slept. Even at nearly midnight, the room hummed with the constant sound of cooling fans, incoming alerts, and the faint glow of dozens of monitors, illuminating the faces of exhausted employees. Rows of screens displayed network traffic, authentication logs, security dashboards, and threat intelligence feeds that updated every second. Most people outside the cybersecurity department imagined corporate security as a quiet office, job filled with passwords and software updates. But tonight felt more like a battlefield. Every workstation carried evidence of a company, under attack from thousands of automated probes, phishing attempts, and suspicious login requests originating from around the world. In the center of the room sat Ethan Carter, a senior security analyst whose reputation had been built on one simple principle: rules applied equally to everyone. He had spent 7 years protecting the company's systems, preventing ransomware attacks, uncovering insider threats, and stopping breaches before executives even knew they existed. His record was nearly flawless, but none of that seemed to matter tonight. A bright red notification suddenly appeared on Ethan's primary monitor, forcing his attention away from a stream of firewall logs. The alert indicated an unauthorized attempt to access a highly restricted development environment containing sensitive customer records, financial projections, and confidential intellectual property. The account attempting the access was marked as privileged, but something immediately felt wrong. Ethan began reviewing the authentication data line by line. The request originated from an unsecured personal device, connected through an unapproved network. Several mandatory security controls had been bypassed, and the account holder had failed multiple verification requirements. According to company policy, the request should never have reached this stage. Ethan quickly initiated an automatic block and documented the violation, believing the issue would end there. Instead, his desk phone rang less than 30 seconds later. Around him, several coworkers exchanged nervous glances. Everyone seemed to know something he did not. Ethan answered the call and listened silently. His expression remained calm, but the atmosphere around him changed immediately. The account he had blocked belonged to Ryan Mercer, the CEO's son. Although Ryan held no official cybersecurity authority, he had become infamous throughout the company for demanding special treatment. Employees whispered stories about departments forced to ignore policies whenever his name appeared. Managers approved requests without question. Rules that applied to thousands of workers somehow disappeared when Ryan was involved. Tonight appeared to be another example. Minutes later, the elevator doors opened and several senior executives entered the Security Operations Center. Their expensive suits looked out of place among the glowing monitors and exhausted analysts. Conversations stopped. Keyboards fell silent. Even the ambient noise of the room seemed quieter as the executives approached Ethan's workstation. One executive pointed directly at the screen displaying the blocked access request. The message was clear without a single word needing explanation. They expected the restriction removed immediately. Ethan reviewed the evidence again, hoping he had overlooked something. He had not. Every security indicator supported the same conclusion. The access request violated multiple compliance requirements. Granting entry would create a significant risk to the company. More importantly, it would establish a dangerous precedent that privileged individuals could bypass protections designed to safeguard sensitive data. Years of cybersecurity training had taught Ethan that major breaches rarely began with sophisticated hackers. Most started when someone decided the rules were inconvenient. The pressure intensified with each passing minute. Executives stood over his desk demanding action. Some questioned his judgment. Others reminded him who owned the company. One implied that career advancement depended on understanding how power worked within the organization. Yet Ethan continued examining the logs, documenting every detail, and following the established incident response process exactly as written. The red warning remained active on his screen. Access denied. Across the operations center, employees pretended to focus on their work, while secretly watching the confrontation unfold. Nobody wanted to be in Ethan's position. Everyone understood the choice before him. One click could make the problem disappear. One exception could satisfy powerful people and preserve his career. Yet that same click could expose millions of records in compromise, years of security investments. The room felt suspended between two futures. As midnight approached, additional alerts appeared. Ethan correlated the activity with other suspicious events occurring across the network. The blocked account had attempted access to multiple restricted systems within a short period. The pattern looked increasingly concerning. What initially appeared to be a simple policy violation now resembled something far more serious. His instincts, sharpened by years of experience, warned him not to back down. The executives grew visibly frustrated. Their confidence that pressure would force compliance began to crack. Ethan remained seated before the wall of glowing monitors, documenting every request, every instruction, and every security finding. The denial stayed in place. Outside the glass walls of the Security Operations Center, the city skyline shimmered beneath the darkness. Unaware that a decision made inside, this room could determine the future of an entire corporation. And while everyone believed the night's story was about a stubborn analyst refusing to obey powerful executives, Ethan had the growing feeling that something much bigger was unfolding behind the scenes. Morning sunlight poured through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the executive boardroom, casting long shadows across the polished conference table that had witnessed countless multi-million-dollar decisions. The room represented power in its purest corporate form. Every chair was occupied by senior executives, legal advisors, and department heads, who rarely gathered together unless the stakes were extraordinary. The atmosphere carried an unusual sense of satisfaction, as though an obstacle had finally been removed. At the far end of the table sat the CEO, his expression cold and controlled, while several executives quietly exchanged confident smiles. In the center of the room stood Ethan Carter, holding a termination letter that had been delivered only minutes earlier. After 7 years of protecting the company's systems, preventing attacks, and following every security protocol he had been trained to enforce, his employment had ended with a single sheet of paper. The explanation provided during the meeting sounded polished and professional, but everyone understood the real reason. Ethan had refused to remove the access block placed on the CEO's son the previous night. Officially, the company cited insubordination, failure to cooperate with leadership directives, and disruption of operational priorities. Unofficially, he had challenged someone powerful enough to believe that rules were optional. Around the table, executives spoke about teamwork, flexibility, and leadership alignment. Their carefully chosen words attempted to transform a cybersecurity dispute into a performance issue. Ethan listened without interruption. He knew arguing would accomplish nothing. The decision had already been made long before the meeting began. Despite the humiliation, Ethan remained remarkably calm. He placed the termination letter on the table and looked around the room. Several faces avoided eye contact. A few executives appeared uncomfortable. Others looked relieved. Deep down, many of them understood he had been following established security procedures. They knew the blocked access request violated company policy. They knew granting entry would have created significant risks. Yet protecting principles often became difficult when careers, bonuses, and political relationships entered the equation. Silence had become more valuable than integrity. What none of them knew was that Ethan had spent the early morning hours reviewing the incident before arriving for the meeting. The activity associated with the blocked account continued to bother him. Certain technical indicators seemed inconsistent with ordinary user behavior. Multiple systems had been targeted within a short time frame. Authentication patterns appeared unusual. Access attempts originated from locations that raised serious questions. He had documented everything thoroughly before losing access to company systems. Whether anyone would ever review the evidence remained uncertain. As the meeting approached its conclusion, one executive leaned back in his chair and suggested moving forward. Another recommended notifying human resources immediately. Someone else mentioned escorting Ethan from the building once administrative procedures were completed. The discussion carried the confidence of people convinced the matter had been permanently resolved. Then the boardroom doors opened. The sound seemed louder than it should have been. Every conversation stopped instantly. Several individuals entered the room, none of whom appeared to belong there. They wore dark professional attire and carried identification credentials unfamiliar to most people present. Their expressions were serious and focused. Leading the group was an older official whose calm demeanor somehow commanded more authority than anyone seated at the conference table. Behind him were cybersecurity specialists carrying secured cases, electronic equipment, and document folders marked with government classification labels. Confusion spread across the room. The CEO rose from his chair and demanded an explanation, but the visitors showed no interest in corporate hierarchy. The lead official calmly introduced himself and informed the board that a federal cybersecurity investigation was underway. Moments earlier, company leadership had assumed they controlled the room. Now the balance of power shifted. so dramatically that several executives visibly paled. The government team began distributing documents across the conference table. One page after another revealed findings that transformed the atmosphere from confidence to panic. During an ongoing national-level cybersecurity operation, investigators had been tracking a sophisticated intrusion, campaign targeting multiple corporations, connected to critical infrastructure and sensitive technologies. Several compromised credentials had been identified across different organizations. Among those credentials was the account Ethan blocked the previous night. What executives believed was a privileged access dispute had actually intersected with an active federal investigation. A large screen at the front of the room displayed technical evidence collected from multiple sources. Timelines, network diagrams, authentication records, and forensic reports painted a picture that grew more alarming with every slide. The account associated with the CEO's son had become a target during a broader attack campaign. Investigators believed malicious actors were attempting to leverage privileged access to penetrate protected environments. Had the requested access been granted, attackers could have gained a foothold inside systems containing highly sensitive information. The room became completely silent. Executives who had pressured Ethan only hours earlier now stared at the evidence in disbelief. The lead investigator continued presenting findings. The denied access request had triggered several automated monitoring systems connected to broader intelligence sharing networks. Those alerts helped investigators identify attack patterns that might otherwise have gone unnoticed. Instead of creating a problem, Ethan's decision had potentially prevented a significant breach while providing valuable information to ongoing national cybersecurity efforts. Several board members slowly turned toward Ethan. For the first time since entering the room, nobody viewed him as an employee facing termination. They viewed him as the person who had been right. The contrast was impossible to ignore. Less than 10 minutes earlier, executives were preparing to remove him from the building. Now, government investigators were using his actions as an example of proper security protocol. Every warning he had documented, every procedure he had followed, and every refusal to compromise standards suddenly carried enormous significance. The CEO's confidence disappeared. Questions that once targeted Ethan now targeted leadership itself. Investigators wanted to know why executives attempted to override established security controls. They requested communications records, internal directives, access logs, and decision-making documentation. Legal advisors who had remained quiet throughout the termination discussion began frantically reviewing notes. Human resources representatives looked visibly distressed. The narrative of a disobedient employee collapsed under the weight of forensic evidence. Ethan remained standing near the center of the room, watching events unfold with a mixture of relief and disbelief. He had spent the night defending a decision that nearly cost him everything. Yet the same decision now protected the company from what could have become a catastrophic incident. The termination letter still rested on the table where it had been placed earlier, but its significance had changed completely. What once symbolized punishment now stood as evidence of leadership failure. As investigators continued presenting their findings, one truth became impossible to deny. Power had spent the entire night trying to silence competence. But facts did not care about titles, family connections, or executive authority. In the end, a single security analyst armed with evidence, integrity, and the courage to follow the rules had outmaneuvered an entire boardroom. The game they thought they had already won had transformed into a checkmate. They never saw coming, black pawn.